Following up on a story we discussed a couple of weeks ago, this has to do with those pistol braces. You'll remember the Biden administration unilaterally through the ATF, without any legislation, decided they wanted to regulate these pistol braces. This is used oftentimes by disabled Americans for self-defense or for sporting purposes, oftentimes veterans of the military who have injuries and they require these pistol braces to be able to use their firearms and exercise their Second Amendment rights. And of course, the Biden administration has unilaterally decided, nope, we got to regulate those. And we said during our discussion of it a couple of weeks ago, somebody's got to do something about this. Who's going to do something about this? Well, we found the guy who's doing something about this. As is often the case, it's the righteous attorney generals at the state level that are actually taking up these issues, and there's none more righteous than Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas. Mr. Attorney General, always good to talk to you, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Well, I'm only slightly overstating the case, but you have been the tip of the spear on so many of these fights against this administration. Talk to me about your lawsuit that you're doing now and what the basis for it is and where it's going to go, sir.
So the basis is really the United States Constitution. We have separation of powers. The founders, rightly so, were concerned about power in the hands of too few people, so they divided it, left the states with most of the power, and gave the federal government limited powers, and then divided three branches. And the branch of government that's supposed to make law is Congress, not the Biden administration, not the president, not the executive branch. They're supposed to implement law. And in this case, they made up through their agency, the ATF, they made up new law that puts rightful gun owners in a really bad spot where they can potentially be felons and end up in jail for 10 years. So obviously we filed a lawsuit saying that you can't do this and these regulations are unconstitutional. They have to go through Congress, not some administrative agency.
Now, I'm guessing their argument is going to be, well, this isn't a firearm, this isn't a gun, this is just an accoutrement, it's an accessory, and therefore it falls under ATF guidelines.
Well, look, we're going to argue back and say there's nothing in any law that gives them the authority to reclassify these braces that help people that are disabled, that help people more accurately fire. This is just a way to regulate people's Second Amendment rights. And clearly the founders thought that pretty important since they listed that in number 2 and really were concerned about just this, that the federal government would disadvantage citizens. And so they said the citizens can be on equal footing with the federal government as much as possible.
I think it's also noteworthy that this was done again through the ATF. There was no public hearing. There was no public discussion. We the people, or representatives like Gun Owners of America, are also a part of this lawsuit, they couldn't actually speak their mind. That's how it's supposed to be done. As you say, yes, it's a separation of power, but there's a reason for that, so that we the people can actually be a part of a transparent process when you're talking about our rights. There's something so insidious about the Biden administration having the arrogance to just go ahead and do something like this, Mr. Paxton.
Well, they don't want to hear from us. They don't want to hear dissenting opinions. This is no different than, dictators or the Chinese government. This is how they operate. And the Biden administration, it makes it a lot easier if they just get to tell us what the law is. And they call it, I think, work around the Constitution. It's a workaround.
Literally.
Yeah, no, they do it all the time. They have workarounds. The Constitution. They don't like the Constitution. They don't like the First Amendment. They don't like the Second Amendment. They don't like the Fourth Amendment. They don't like the Fifth Amendment. They just work around it and just say, here, we're doing it this way. The Constitution is not part of our repertoire. We're just going to change the law. And that's why we have to go sue them, because they just continue to do this. This is why we have 40 lawsuits against the Biden administration.
Yeah, and we've seen the workarounds, of course, with this illegal and unconstitutional student loan repayment scheme that he's trying to get done. And of course, the workarounds are so obvious on the border. And I'd love to shift gears here and get an update from you. Last time we had you on, Attorney General Paxton, you talked about some of the lawsuits that you had with regard to the federal government's obligation to secure our border, and certainly the state of Texas is feeling the brunt of that. Where do things stand right now?
So we added another lawsuit. We had to sue them because they wanted to add 30,000 new people that don't even have to go through the border. If they're from certain countries, Nicaragua, El Salvador, other countries, they get to just fly into the country and just bypass the whole immigration system. Yeah. And I guess it's a way to get people around the country, and it makes it look like there's less people crossing the border. Unfortunately, that makes every state a border state, and it's not authorized by federal law. They're just making this up.
Yeah.
And this is unconstitutional. You can't make this stuff up.
Can you break that down for me? Because I believe that the president, when he announced this, by the way, it was under the guise of him saying, yeah, we're going to get tough on the border. Yeah, and then they're going to bend the law or write new law that allows 30,000 new people to come into the country, no questions asked. They're using something called parole, not like parole when you get out of jail early or whatever. What is the parole rule? Is it part of legislation, or is it just something that DHS or Border Control came up with? And even if it was legislation, was it ever meant to be used like this?
No, I mean, prosecutors have this sort of discretion. So does Border Patrol. There's certain like extreme cases where they can let people into the country, or in the case of crimes, the Biden administration is letting criminals come into the country, and they're using this broad idea that, well, this is just discretion. We're just using our discretion. But that's not what the design was. The design was individual case by case, not a broad rule saying, oh, everyone from this country can come in.
Yeah.
Everyone who committed this crime is now free to come into our country. So just send them from all your jails all over the world. We'll take them. That's not what prosecutorial discretion or parole is supposed to be about, at least as it's written into federal law.
The way it was once described to me, Mr. Attorney General, was, Border Patrol agent is trying to keep people up, but here's a pregnant woman. She's actually in labor. Humanity dictates, all right, let's do something to help this woman. Let's get her across. Let's get her to the hospital. That's a case-by-case basis, an emergency. Somebody's dying in the family. Okay, we'll let them in to sort of be by their deathbed. But that, again, case by case is the key here. This is a broad sweeping. He even put a maximum quota of 30,000 per month. That's just illegal. It's got to be.
Yeah. So what you said is exactly right. So that's maybe 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 100,000 case where there's an extreme circumstance. The Biden administration said, well, if we can do that, let's just say everyone in these circumstances, not just that one, but that are from a certain country or who have committed a certain crime, we'll just broaden it to cover all 100,000 or all 10,000. So we're just going to give an exception for everybody. So that is not the design of the federal law or the design of giving discretion.
I think something also that's interesting and worth discussing is the impact there in Texas on these border towns. We just saw in Florida, the state legislature has given the governor more leeway to ship illegal aliens to other cities. We saw what happened in Martha's Vineyard. And of course, when your governor Abbott sends illegal immigrants to Washington, D.C. out in front of Kamala Harris's home, suddenly it gets attention. And that's good. I'm glad that it does get attention. But what's not getting attention is the very real impact on border towns in Texas, what it's doing to the schools, what it's doing to the infrastructure down there.
No, the media, I mean, unlike you, the major media doesn't cover it. They don't show the devastating effects on people on the border. They don't show the devastating costs to the states that are having to educate and healthcare and law enforcement. They don't tell the stories of the criminals that have hurt people, that have killed people, that have damaged property, the billions of dollars, and also the social costs of drug importation, where over 100,000 people died of overdoses last year. The numbers are higher than they've ever been. And it's because the Biden administration has encouraged the cartels to transport as many people here as possible. And in doing that, allowed them to transport drugs.
So it really is the state attorney generals right now that are sort of the last fail-safe, it appears, to utilize the judicial system to actually call the Biden administration into question here. Because Congress, I mean, as much as the majority, the Republican majority in the House can do investigations of, they actually don't have as much leeway as you have in federal court.
Look, I'm glad they're doing these investigations. I'm hoping they'll give us information that will allow us to do even more. So I'm actually very encouraged by the fact that they're getting to ask these questions, that they're going to hopefully get information that's been hidden, that they've not been transparent about. And that'll give us even more ammo to go fight the fight and stop all of these illegal actions by the Biden administration that are damaging our country.
And sticking with the border, do you believe, and have you been in discussion with any from your delegation or any members of the House with regard to moving forward with impeachment proceedings for Secretary of Homeland Security Mayorkas?
I have not had any direct conversations. I've heard stories about them expressing the desire to do that. I mean, I think it's absolutely needed. The guy has completely abdicated his responsibility to protect the border, and then he acts like he's doing it. He always says, we're doing it. We are securing. He couldn't be more misrepresenting what's actually happening.
Yeah. By the way, real fast, any sign of Kamala Harris? I know she's the border czar. I know this is really important. It's on the front burner for her. Has she been hanging out down there in Texas at all?
Who is she?
Ah, that's what I thought. Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. Thanks for joining us, sir. Great stuff. More to come tonight on O'Connor Tonight. You're watching Salem News Channel.